My name is Margaret Thompson, and at 73, I thought I knew what family meant. Last Thanksgiving changed everything, revealing truths about my daughter that would shatter my world and ultimately transform the lives of countless elderly people across our community. I was sitting at my daughter Sarah's perfectly decorated dining table in her suburban Connecticut home, surrounded by the golden glow of candlelight and the aroma of roasted turkey. The house itself was a testament to Sarah and her husband Mark's apparent success, a sprawling colonial with granite countertops, hardwood floors, and expensive artwork adorning every wall. My arthritis was acting up again that evening, the November chill having settled deep into my joints, making it difficult to cut my food properly. The turkey was particularly tough, and my weakened grip on the knife wasn't helping matters. "Sarah, honey, could you help me cut this?" I asked quietly, not wanting to interrupt the animated conversation between Mark and their teenage children about some new video game. The request seemed innocent enough. After all, I was her mother, the woman who had spent countless nights helping. Her with homework, who had sacrificed vacations to pay for her college education, who had been there for every milestone in her life. "Mom, you need to stop begging for help with every little thing," she snapped, her voice cutting through the family chatter like ice. "You're becoming too dependent. It's honestly embarrassing." The room fell silent. My son-in-law Mark shifted uncomfortably in his chair, suddenly finding his mashed potatoes incredibly interesting. My grandchildren, Emma, 16, and Tyler, 14, stared at their plates, their faces flushed with secondhand embarrassment. I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation and hurt, the familiar sting of tears threatening behind my eyes. This wasn't the first time Sarah had spoken to me this way. Over the past year, her patience with my age-related limitations had grown increasingly thin. When I'd asked for help reaching something on a high shelf, she'd rolled her eyes. When I'd mentioned that driving at night was becoming difficult, she'd suggested I was being dramatic. When I'd admitted to feeling lonely in my big empty house since Robert's passing 3 years ago, she'd changed the subject. "I just needed help cutting the turkey," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the uncomfortable silence that had settled over the table. "That's exactly what I mean, Mom. You can't keep expecting us to do everything for you. Every time we turn around, it's something else you need help with. Maybe it's time you considered other options." I knew what she meant. We'd had this conversation before, about assisted living facilities, about me being too much work for the family, about how my presence was becoming an inconvenience in their busy lives. But hearing it said so coldly in front of my grandchildren, whom I adored, broke something fundamental inside me. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of forced conversation and stolen glances. Emma eventually helped me cut my turkey, shooting her mother a disapproving look that gave me hope that not all compassion had been bred out of the younger generation. Tyler asked me about my garden, a subject he knew would cheer me up, bless his heart. That night, I lay awake in their pristine guest room, staring at the ceiling and listening to the muffled argument coming from Sarah and Mark's bedroom down the hall. I couldn't make out the words, but Sarah's sharp, frustrated tone was unmistakable. I thought about my late husband Robert, who'd worked 2 jobs his entire adult life, days at the steel mill and evenings as a security guard, to build our modest fortune. I thought about the inheritance I'd been planning to leave Sarah, nearly $800,000 accumulated through decades of careful saving, smart investments, and Robert's substantial life insurance policy. By morning, as I watched the sun rise over Connecticut's frost-covered landscape, I'd made a decision that would change everything, not just for my family, but for an entire community of vulnerable elderly people who desperately needed an advocate. The next day, I called my lawyer David Richardson and scheduled an appointment. It was time to take control of my own story, to show my daughter that I was far from the helpless old woman she seemed to think I'd become. But what I was about to discover about my family's true motivations was going to shock me more than I ever imagined possible. Tell me in the comments where you're watching this video from. And if this story is already grabbing your attention, hit that like button and subscribe for the incredible journey ahead. 3 weeks after that humiliating Thanksgiving dinner, I sat in my lawyer's mahogany-paneled office with a determination I hadn't felt since Robert's funeral. David Richardson had been handling my affairs for over a decade, and his expression grew increasingly concerned as I explained my decision with unwavering clarity. "Margaret, are you absolutely certain about this? $800,000 is a substantial inheritance to redirect," David said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses and leaning forward across his imposing desk. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," I replied firmly, thinking about Sarah's cold words and the way my grandchildren had witnessed my humiliation. "I want to donate it all to Sunset Manor Nursing Home." David leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers steepled thoughtfully. "That's quite generous, and I admire your philanthropic spirit, but may I ask what prompted this dramatic decision? Last time we spoke, just 6 months ago, you were excited about leaving everything to Sarah and ensuring your grandchildren's college educations were secured. I told him about Thanksgiving, about Sarah's increasing impatience with my age-related limitations, about feeling like an unwanted burden in my own family, despite everything I'd done for them over the years. What I didn't tell him initially was that I'd been doing extensive research on Sunset Manor, a nonprofit facility that struggled daily to provide quality care due to chronic underfunding and state budget cuts. I've been volunteering there twice. A week since Robert passed, I explained. I've seen how these elderly residents are treated, not by the staff, who are angels working for barely above minimum wage, but by their own families. "David, some of these people haven't had a visitor in months." David nodded sympathetically, but I could see there was something else on his mind. "Margaret, there's something I need to discuss with you. I received some documents yesterday that might be relevant to your decision." My heart skipped a beat as he opened a thick manila folder and spread papers across his desk. Bank statements, credit reports, mortgage documents, business loan applications, all bearing Sarah and Mark's names and social security numbers. "I don't understand. Why do you have these personal financial documents?" David's expression grew grave. "Sarah contacted me last month. She wanted detailed information about your will, about the timeline for inheritance distribution, about when she might expect to receive her legacy. She mentioned some pressing financial obligations that required immediate attention." The documents painted a shocking picture that made my stomach churn. Sarah and Mark were drowning in debt, credit cards maxed out at nearly $50,000, mortgage payments 3 months behind, a second mortgage I didn't even know existed, and something called a business investment loan for nearly $200,000. "She's been counting on my money to solve their financial crisis," I whispered, the pieces of their recent behavior suddenly falling into place like a horrifying puzzle. "It appears so, Margaret. But there's something else you should know, something that deeply concerns me as both your attorney and your friend." David's voice took on a protective tone. "Sarah has been making inquiries about power of attorney proceedings. She's been consulting with elder law attorneys about the process." My blood ran cold, and I felt the room spin slightly around me. "What exactly does that mean?" "She's been exploring legal ways to gain control over your finances, Margaret. The consultations focused on citing your age and what she termed your recent episodes of mental confusion and poor judgment." "Mental confusion? Poor judgment?" "David, I balance my checkbook to the penny every month. I manage my own medications, my own household, my own social calendar. What could she possibly mean?" David pulled out another document. "According to the notes from her consultation, she cited incidents like you calling her for help with simple tasks, forgetting to pay bills on time, and making irrational emotional decisions, presumably referring to your increased generosity toward charities since Robert's death. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I'd ever experienced. My own daughter, the child I'd raised with unconditional love and support, was systematically building a case to strip me of my independence and autonomy. There's more, David continued reluctantly. She's also been in contact with a property developer who specializes in purchasing homes from elderly sellers. They've done preliminary assessments of your property value. My house, the modest 2-story colonial that Robert and I had bought 40 years ago with a VA loan, where we'd raised Sarah, where I'd nursed Robert through his final illness, where every room held precious memories. In the current market, it was worth nearly $500,000. She's been planning this for months, I realized, feeling physically sick as the full scope of my daughter's betrayal became clear. I'm afraid. It gets worse, Margaret. The business investment loan that put them in this financial hole? It's for a multi-level marketing scheme that collapsed last year. They're facing potential bankruptcy, and creditors are already calling. The phone in David's office rang, interrupting our conversation. After a brief exchange, he hung up and looked at me with surprise. That was my secretary. Sarah just called requesting an emergency appointment. She wants to discuss urgent matters regarding your cognitive decline and the need for immediate intervention. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady when I responded. Schedule it for tomorrow, David. It's time my daughter learned that this confused old woman is about to outmaneuver her in ways she never saw coming. What happened at that meeting would expose the true depth of my daughter's schemes and set in motion a plan for justice that would Liang everyone involved. The revelation about Sarah's calculated betrayal hit me like a freight train, but it also ignited something fierce and protective inside me that I hadn't felt since my days as a young mother defending my child on the playground. The difference now was that I was defending myself against that same child, and the irony wasn't lost on me. Over the next few days, I developed a comprehensive plan that would not only expose Sarah's schemes, but also create a lasting impact for elderly people facing similar manipulation. I wasn't going to simply react to her betrayal. I was going to turn it into something meaningful that could help others. My first call was to Mrs. Chen, my neighbor whose own daughter had manipulated her into signing over power of attorney before, placing her in a questionable assisted living facility against her will. Mrs. Chen had been fighting the situation for months, but felt powerless against the legal system and her daughter's manipulation. Margaret, what you're describing sounds exactly like what happened to me, Mrs. Chen said over tea in my kitchen. My daughter Linda convinced everyone I was becoming forgetful, that I couldn't manage my affairs. She used my confusion after my husband's death against me. Then I contacted Robert's old friend, Judge William Hayes, who'd retired after 30 years on the bench, but still consulted on elder law cases. His insights were both enlightening and terrifying. Margaret, what you're describing is more common than you'd think, and it's becoming an epidemic, Judge Hayes told me over coffee at our local diner. Adult children pressuring elderly parents, manipulating them emotionally and psychologically to gain access to their assets. It's a form of financial abuse that often goes unreported because victims are ashamed or don't realize they're being manipulated. He pulled out a small notebook and flipped through several pages. In the past year alone, I've seen cases involving forged signatures on deeds, elderly parents being convinced they're too confused to manage their own affairs, and families using medical diagnoses as weapons to strip away autonomy. That's when I decided to take my plan to the next level. I would donate my inheritance, yes, but I'd also document everything, create a comprehensive case study that could help other families recognize the warning signs before it was too late. I hired a private investigator named Tony Martinez, a retired police detective who specialized in elder abuse cases and had an excellent reputation for thorough, discreet work. Within a week, he'd uncovered information that made my daughter's betrayal seem even more calculating and deliberate. Your daughter has been building a systematic case against you for over 6 months, Tony reported, sitting in my living room with a thick file folder. She's been telling neighbors, your doctor's office staff, and even the grocery store clerks that you're showing signs of dementia and memory loss. I felt my anger building as he continued. She's documented every time you've asked for help, every minor mistake or moment of confusion, and she's been presenting these as evidence of cognitive decline to anyone who will listen. But here's the interesting part, Tony continued, his expression grim. She's also been meeting regularly with a property developer named Marcus Webb, who specializes in what he calls distressed elderly sales. He has a reputation for pressuring elderly homeowners into quick sales at below market prices. The pieces were forming a picture so ugly I could barely comprehend it. My own daughter had been systematically undermining my reputation and independence while planning to profit from my vulnerability. There's more. That business investment, loan Mark took out? It wasn't for a failed MLM scheme like they claimed. It was for high-stakes cryptocurrency trading that went catastrophically wrong. They lost nearly $300,000 of borrowed money, and the loan sharks are getting impatient. My house phone rang, interrupting our conversation. Sarah's name appeared on the caller ID. "Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation at Thanksgiving. Maybe I was a bit harsh with my words." Her voice sounded artificially sweet. "I'd like to take you to lunch tomorrow, just the two of us. We need to have a serious conversation about your future, and I want to make sure you understand that everything I'm suggesting comes from a place of love." I looked at Tony, who was already setting up a small recording device on my coffee table. "I'd love to have lunch with you, dear. Where would you like to meet?" After I hung up, Tony explained the recording laws in our state. One-party consent means you can legally record any conversation you're part of. This could be exactly the evidence we need to expose her true intentions. That evening, I sat in Robert's old chair, looking at his photograph on the mantelpiece. "I know you'd be heartbroken about Sarah, honey," I whispered to the image. "But I also know you'd be proud of me for fighting back. These other elderly folks need someone to stand up for them, and maybe this old lady still has some fight left in her." The next morning, I prepared for lunch with my daughter, knowing this would likely be my opportunity to see her true intentions firsthand. I wore the small recording device Tony had given me, hidden beneath my favorite blue cardigan, the one Sarah always complimented. What happened at that lunch would change our relationship forever and set in motion a chain of events that would expose a scandal much bigger than my family's betrayal. If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible twists coming your way. The restaurant Sarah chose was the Riverside Club, an expensive establishment overlooking the Connecticut River, where a simple lunch could easily cost $70 per person. Ironically, this was the same place she used to dismiss as ridiculously overpriced whenever I suggested we meet there for special occasions. Now, watching her confidently order the most expensive items on the menu, I realized she was probably planning to charge this meal to one of those maxed-out credit cards, viewing it as an investment in her inheritance scheme. Sarah arrived looking impeccably dressed and polished, but I could see the tension lines around her eyes and the way her hands trembled slightly as she hugged me. She was nervous, which meant she was preparing to make her move. "Mom, you look wonderful today," she said, though I noticed her studying my appearance carefully, as if cataloging any signs of frailty or confusion she could later use to support her narrative. "That's such a lovely cardigan. Blue has always been your color." "Thank you, dear. You seem a bit stressed." "Is everything all right with the family?" I asked, activating the small recording device Tony had concealed in my purse. In our state, one-party consent made this completely legal. Sarah's perfectly practiced smile flickered for just a moment. "Just the usual pressures of modern life, you know? Keeping up with the kids' activities, Mark's business ventures, maintaining the house. Speaking of which, I wanted to talk to you about your living situation." "Here it comes," I thought, maintaining my composed expression while my heart began racing with anticipation and anger. "I've been doing extensive research into really wonderful assisted living communities in the area," she continued, pulling out a glossy brochure from her designer handbag. Places where you'd have professional help with daily tasks, organized social activities, medical care available on-site 24 hours a day. Some of these facilities are absolutely beautiful, like luxury resorts. I'm managing just fine in my own home, Sarah. I've lived there for 40 years. It's where your father and I built our life together. Mom, please be realistic about your situation. Her voice took on that patronizing tone I'd grown to despise. Last week, you called me because you couldn't open a pickle jar. 2 weeks ago, you mentioned forgetting to pay the electric bill on time. What if you fall and no one finds you for hours? What if there's a medical emergency and you can't reach the phone? I called you about the jar because I thought you might want to help your mother with a simple task. And I was 1 day late with the electric bill because I was attending Mrs. Patterson's funeral. Silly me for thinking my daughter would want to be helpful rather than judgmental. Sarah's carefully constructed facade began to crack slightly. Look, Mom, I know this is difficult to hear, but Mark and I have been discussing your financial situation extensively. We think it might be time to consolidate your assets, maybe set up a comprehensive trust with me as the trustee. It would simplify everything. For my own protection, I suppose. Exactly. You're getting older, and these complex financial decisions are becoming too overwhelming for someone your age. I have experience with investment management, and I could handle everything. Pay your bills, manage your portfolio, make sure all your affairs are in order, ensure you're properly taken care of. I leaned forward slightly, my voice remaining steady despite my racing pulse. And what about my will, Sarah? You haven't specifically asked about that yet today. Her eyes lit up with what she probably thought was subtle interest, but I could see the greedy calculation behind her expression. Well, if you want to discuss estate planning, I know Dad always intended for me to inherit the house and your savings. He used to talk about how important it was to keep the family assets together, to make sure I could provide security for Emma and Tyler's futures. $800,000 would certainly help secure someone's future, I said quietly, watching her reaction carefully. Sarah's mask slipped completely for a moment, revealing naked avarice before she caught herself. You know the exact amount of your estate? I know about a lot of things, Sarah, more than you think I do. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. Including your debt situation, including your meetings with Marcus Webb, the property developer, including your consultations with elder law attorneys about having me declared incompetent. The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. Her fork clattered against her plate, and several other diners turned to look at our table. Mom, I don't know what you think you know, but there are explanations for everything. I know that tomorrow morning I'm donating your entire inheritance to Sunset Manor Nursing Home, I announced calmly, cutting off her stammering attempt at damage control. Sarah's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as her hands began shaking visibly. You can't do that. That money belongs to our family. Dad worked his whole life building that nest egg for me and the grandchildren. It belongs to me, Sarah. Your father worked his whole life to take care of me, not to enable your poor financial decisions and gambling debts. And I've decided to give it to people who actually care about helping the elderly instead of exploiting them for personal gain. The transformation in my daughter was immediate and shocking. Gone was any pretense of concern for my welfare, replaced by raw panic and fury. Mom, you're clearly not thinking straight. This kind of erratic, spiteful behavior proves you're not competent to make major financial decisions. I should have acted sooner when I noticed the signs of your decline. The only decline here is in your moral character, Sarah. She frantically pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through her contacts. I'm calling Dr. Peterson right now. We need to have you evaluated immediately. This kind of vindictive, irrational behavior toward your own family, go ahead and call him. While you're at it, you might want to call Marcus Webb and tell him the house sale isn't happening. You might also want to call your creditors and explain that your inheritance windfall just evaporated. What happened next would prove just how far my daughter was willing to go when her carefully constructed plans crumbled around her. Hit like and subscribe if you want to see justice served in the most unexpected way possible. Sarah's reaction was immediate, volcanic, and revealed the true depth of her desperation. The carefully constructed persona of the caring daughter, concerned about her aging mother's welfare, shattered completely, replaced by someone I barely recognized. Someone driven by greed and panic who would say anything to protect her schemes. Mom, you absolutely cannot be serious about this donation. You're clearly not thinking straight, and this proves beyond any doubt that you need someone rational to manage your affairs immediately. Her voice carried across the restaurant, causing several nearby tables to stop their conversations and stare at our increasingly dramatic scene. Actually, Sarah, it proves I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. For the first time since your father's death, I'm seeing situations and people for exactly what they are. She frantically pulled out her phone, her manicured fingers shaking as she scrolled through her contacts with desperate urgency. I'm calling Dr. Peterson right now. We need to have you evaluated for cognitive decline and possible dementia. This kind of erratic, vindictive behavior toward your own family is a clear sign of deteriorating mental capacity. The only deteriorating situation here is your financial stability and your moral compass, dear. Sarah spent the next hour alternating between different manipulation tactics, each more desperate than the last. She tried guilt trips, reminding me of every sacrifice she claimed to have made for me over the years, conveniently forgetting the decades of love, support, and financial assistance I'd provided her family. She attempted emotional manipulation, bringing up Robert's memory and claiming he would be heartbroken to see me turning against our own daughter. She even resorted to threats, warning me she would have me committed, contest any donations in court, and cut off my access to my beloved grandchildren. But I had been preparing for this moment, and I had several more surprises waiting for her. Sarah, there's something else you should know about my recent activities. For the past month, I've been volunteering extensively at Sunset Manor, and I've met dozens of elderly residents whose own families abandoned them after systematically draining their life savings. Her eyes narrowed suspiciously, sensing that I was building towards something significant. What are you talking about? What does that have to do with anything? I'm talking about Mrs. Rodriguez, whose son convinced her to sign over power of attorney, then immediately emptied her savings account of $43,000 and dumped her at the facility without even visiting once. I'm talking about Mr. Kim, whose daughter sold his house for cash while he was recovering from surgery, leaving him homeless and penniless. I'm talking about Mrs. Patterson, whose family convinced her to sign over her pension and Social Security checks, then disappeared completely when she developed health problems. I pulled out a thick manila folder from my large purse, spreading documentation across our table with deliberate precision. I've been working closely with an elder abuse attorney named Jennifer Walsh to help these families pursue justice and recover their stolen assets. And Sarah, your name and Mark's have come up repeatedly in our investigation. My name? What investigation? You're making this up to manipulate me. The investigation into financial elder abuse patterns in our county and surrounding areas. It turns out you're not the only adult child who's been systematically pressuring elderly parents to gain access to their assets. There's actually an organized network of people sharing detailed strategies online, forums dedicated to discussing how to obtain power of attorney quickly, how to have parents declared incompetent using minimal evidence, how to liquidate elderly people's assets rapidly while avoiding legal scrutiny. Sarah's face had gone completely white, and I could see beads of perspiration forming on her forehead despite the restaurant's air conditioning. Furthermore, I continued relentlessly, the FBI's Elder Fraud Unit has been tracking digital communications related to these schemes, and Mark's business email account has been extremely active in some very interesting online communities. Communities with names like Inheritance Acceleration and Senior Asset Management Solutions. This wasn't entirely true yet, but Tony Martinez had found evidence of Mark's participation in online forums discussing strategies for accessing elderly parents' assets, and I could see from Sarah's panicked expression that my calculated bluff had hit very close to home. "Mom, please, let's just calm down and discuss this rationally like adults." "I am being completely rational, Sarah. Tomorrow morning, I'm not only donating my inheritance to Sunset Manor, I'm also announcing the creation of the Thompson Foundation for Elder Rights, using the media attention from this substantial donation to launch a public awareness campaign about financial elder abuse in our community." Sarah stood up so abruptly that she knocked over her chair, creating a loud crash that caused every person in the restaurant to turn and stare at our table. Her designer purse fell to the floor, spilling its contents across the expensive carpet. "You're going to regret this decision, Mother. Mark has business connections, legal connections, people who can make serious problems for you. We'll fight this donation through every court in the state, and we'll win because you're clearly suffering from age-related mental decline." But as she stormed toward the restaurant exit, leaving me to handle the check and the embarrassing scene she'd created, she had no idea that everything she'd just said had been recorded with crystal clarity. She also didn't know that my real plan, the one that would expose her schemes and protect countless other elderly victims, was just beginning to unfold. The young waitress approached nervously to check on me. "Ma'am, are you all right? Should I call someone for you?" "I'm perfectly fine, dear," I replied with a smile, leaving a generous tip. "Actually, I'm better than I've been in months. Sometimes you have to lose a battle to win the war." 3 months later, I stood at the podium in Sunset Manor's completely renovated community center, looking out at a room packed with local and national media representatives, elderly residents and their families, social workers, attorneys specializing in elder law, and advocates for senior citizens' rights from across New England. The Thompson Foundation for Elder Rights had exceeded my wildest expectations and become a beacon of hope for vulnerable elderly people throughout the region. "Ladies and gentlemen, members of the press, fellow advocates, and my dear friends here at Sunset Manor," I began, my voice steady and strong, projecting the confidence that comes from fighting for justice and winning. "Today, we're not just announcing a substantial donation to improve the lives of elderly residents. We're exposing a crisis that affects millions of elderly Americans nationwide. Systematic financial abuse perpetrated by their own adult children, the very people who should be protecting them." The extensive investigation that followed my recorded conversation with Sarah had uncovered a sophisticated network of adult children who'd been systematically exploiting their elderly parents using techniques shared through online forums and informal support groups. Mark's business emails had indeed revealed connections to a group calling itself Inheritance Acceleration Network, where members shared detailed strategies for gaining control of parents' assets quickly and efficiently. The FBI's Elder Fraud Unit, initially skeptical of my claims, had taken serious interest once presented with the evidence Tony Martinez and I had compiled. Sarah and Mark were now facing federal charges for conspiracy to commit elder fraud, attempted financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and wire fraud related to their online activities. Their case had become a landmark prosecution that was being watched by elder rights advocates nationwide. "The techniques these predators use are sophisticated and emotionally devastating," I continued, seeing Sarah in the back of the room accompanied by her attorney, her face a mixture of shame, anger, and defeat. "They systematically undermine their elderly parents' confidence, convince family members and community members that their targets are becoming mentally incapable, then swoop in to help by taking control of all financial decisions." But the most satisfying moment came when I introduced the audience to Mrs. Rodriguez, Mr. Kim, Mrs. Patterson, and 12 other elderly residents whose stories had inspired my crusade for justice. Thanks to the Thompson Foundation's legal aid, fund, and media attention, they'd all successfully recovered significant portions of their stolen assets and were pursuing legal action against their abusive family members. "Mrs. Rodriguez," I said, helping the dignified 80-year-old woman to the microphone, "would you like to tell everyone what happened to you and how the foundation helped?" My son Carlos convinced me I was too confused to manage my own money. After my husband died, she said in a clear, strong voice, he said he was helping me by taking control of my accounts. Within 6 months, he'd stolen $43,000 and put me in a cheap nursing home where the staff barely spoke English and the food was terrible. I thought I would die there, forgotten and broke. She paused, wiping away tears. But Mrs. Thompson found me, listened to my story, and helped me fight back. Carlos is now in prison. I got most of my money back, and I'm living here at Sunset Manor with dignity and friends who care about me. The $800,000 hadn't just renovated Sunset Manor's facilities. It had funded comprehensive legal aid for dozens of elder abuse victims, created an emergency fund for elderly people suddenly cut off by their families, established a 24-hour hotline staffed by retired social workers and attorneys, and launched an educational campaign that had already prevented dozens of similar cases. My daughter told me to stop begging for help, I said, looking directly at Sarah, whose attorney was whispering urgently in her ear. She was absolutely right. I stopped begging and started demanding justice, demanding respect, demanding that our society protect its most vulnerable members instead of allowing them to be preyed upon by the people who should love them most. Judge William Hayes approached the podium as I concluded my remarks, carrying an official-looking document. Margaret, on behalf of the Connecticut State Bar Association and the Governor's Office on Aging, I'm honored to present you with the Lifetime Achievement Award for Elder Advocacy. Your courage in exposing these crimes and your dedication to protecting vulnerable seniors has created a model that other states are now adopting. After the ceremony, reporters surrounded me with questions about the Foundation's future plans, the ongoing criminal cases, and my advice for other elderly people who suspect they're being manipulated by family members. Judge Hayes approached, with a broad smile and evident pride. Margaret, I've seen a lot of cases in my 30 years on the bench, but this transformation from victim to advocate, this systematic approach to creating lasting change, this is how real social progress happens. You've probably saved hundreds of elderly people from similar exploitation. As the crowd dispersed and residents returned to their daily activities, Sarah approached me one final time, her expensive attorney trailing behind her, looking uncomfortable and checking his watch frequently. Mom, I know things got out of hand, and maybe I made some mistakes in how I approached things, but surely we can work something out between family members. Save your rehearsed apology, Sarah. Your trial starts next month. Use the time between now and then to think seriously about the person you became and whether that's who you want to be for the rest of your life. Think about whether the money was worth destroying your relationship with your mother and setting such a terrible example for your children. She walked away with her attorney, and I realized I felt lighter and more purposeful than I had since Robert's death. I'd lost a daughter, but gained a mission that gave my remaining years meaning. I'd lost an inheritance, but gained justice for countless elderly victims who had nowhere else to turn. Emma and Tyler, my grandchildren, had reached out privately to express their shame about their parents' behavior and their pride in my advocacy work. They were planning to volunteer at the foundation during their summer break, giving me hope that the next generation would be better than the one I'd raised. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give isn't money or unconditional forgiveness. It's the courage to stand up and fight for what's right, even when it means standing against your own family. Sometimes love means holding people accountable for their actions, not enabling their worst impulses. If this story moved you and opened your eyes to the reality of elder abuse, please like this video and subscribe for more incredible true stories of justice and resilience. Remember, respect your elders, protect their dignity, and never let greed destroy the sacred bonds of family. Thank you for watching, and remember that it's never too late to fight for what's right.